Alright, today we're going to take some time to talk about how to use the RDP, PADI's Recreational Dive Planner. To start out, let's look at the three tables that make up the SLATE. At first glance, it looks like a ton of information, but once you break it down into sections, things make a lot of sense and it's really simple to use. The first table is no decompression limits and group designation. This table tells you how long you can dive at a certain depth and how much nitrogen you have in your body at the end of the dive in the form of a pressure group. Now this is really important because, as we've learned, we need to manage the amount of nitrogen that accumulates in our bodies as we dive. Table 2 is surface interval credit. After we come up from a dive, excess nitrogen begins to leave our body. The longer you remain on the surface, the more nitrogen is released from your body tissues. This table calculates the remaining nitrogen after a surface interval. When you begin another dive, you need to account for the remaining nitrogen in your body. Table 3 calculates your residual nitrogen time and also gives you the maximum time you can dive at a particular depth based on the pressure group you were in at the start of your dive. There are also some notes and rules you need to follow when planning your dives. These are listed on the back of the SLATE, and we'll take a look at each one a little bit later. You'll need a few items to plan your dives, starting with the RDP SLATE. You also need a depth gauge and a timing device. Make sure your watch is waterproof. Lastly, you'll need a pencil and a blank diving slate. While we're at it, make sure you bring along your logbook so you can log your dive. That's all you need to plan your dives. Right, before we get started, let's take some time to familiarize ourselves with some basic rules for the RDP and some terms. Bottom time is the total time in minutes from the beginning of descent until the beginning of final ascent to the surface or safety stop. To be conservative, we're going to plan a safety stop for all our dives. Any dive planned to 10 meters or less should be calculated as a dive to 10 meters. Use the exact or next greater depth shown for the depths of all dives. Use the exact or next greater time shown for the times of all dives. Slowly ascend from all dives at a rate that does not exceed 18 meters per minute. Slower is acceptable and encouraged. Always be conservative and avoid using the maximum limits provided. When planning a dive in cold water or under conditions that may be strenuous, plan the dive assuming the depth is 4 meters deeper than actual. Plan repetitive dives so each successive dive is to a shallower depth. Never follow a dive with a deeper dive. Always plan your deepest dive first. Limit all repetitive dives to 30 meters or shallower. Limit your maximum depth to your training and experience level. As an open water diver, limit your dives to a maximum depth of 18 meters. Divers with greater training and experience should generally limit themselves to a maximum depth of 30 meters. Divers with deep diver training and a reasonable objective may dive as deep as 40 meters. All dives should be planned as no decompression dives, and no dive should ever exceed the maximum depth limitation for recreational scuba, 40 meters. Decompression diving is beyond the parameters of the recreational dive planner. Never exceed the limits of the recreational dive planner, and whenever possible, avoid diving to the limits of the planner. 42 meters is for emergency purposes only. Do not dive to this depth. A safety stop for 3 to 5 minutes at 5 meters is recommended at the end of all dives. A safety stop for 3 minutes at 5 meters is required anytime you come within 3 pressure groups of a no decompression limit and for any dive to a depth of 30 meters or deeper. Table 1 is where you start planning your first dive, and if you only do one dive in a 6-hour period, it's the only table you need to use. So let's say you start your first dive to 15 meters. We need to see how long we can dive at a depth of 15 meters. Begin at the word start on the top left-hand corner of the RDP. Right below start is a row called depth. In this case, we're using meters. Follow that row over till you find 15 or greater. Since we don't find 15, we stop at the next greater depth, 16 meters. Now follow that column all the way to the last number, the one in the black box. 72, right? That's the no decompression limit for 15 meters, rounded up to 16 meters. And this is the maximum time we can dive to 15 meters. So, if you're only doing one dive, your NDL is 72 minutes. If you plan your dive to 18 meters, you could dive up to 56 minutes. And if you wanted to go to 14 meters, your NDL would be a whopping 98 minutes. Now notice on the SLATE that any dive time in gray or black boxes have mandatory safety stops. So let's say we dive to our planned depth of 15 meters for 40 minutes, and we want to go on another dive the same day. We need to account for the amount of nitrogen that's in our bodies after the dive, and Table 1 will do just that. Follow the 16-meter column until you find 40 or higher. There's no 40, so we stop at 42. That's 42 minutes. Now, follow the row to the right until you come to a letter. As we scroll across the row, we come to the letter N. That means that we surface from our first dive in pressure group N. Now, what does pressure group N really mean? The short answer is that we really don't need to know. There's some high-powered calculating, plenty of science, and a little bit of genius math behind pressure group N. But thankfully, all we need to know is that we are in pressure group N, and with that information, we can plan more dives for the day. Now, we're going to slide over to Table 2 on the SLATE. This is where we find out our pressure group after our surface interval. That's the time we spend above the water before we go on our next dive. Since we surfaced in pressure group N, we enter Table 2 from row N. Let's say we stay on the surface for 1 hour. Follow row N along until you find the box where 1 hour falls between the two times listed. In our case, the box has 1 hour to 1 hour and 8 minutes. So now we follow that column down until we get to the letter at the end of the column. This is our pressure group after the time we spend above the water, and it happens to be pressure group D. Now that we know our new pressure group, we can plan our next dive. Okay, now we need to turn the SLATE over and consult Table 3. Table 3 tells us two things. First, it tells us how much residual nitrogen time we have. Residual nitrogen is the remaining nitrogen in our body from our previous dive or dives, and we account for that using RNT. Secondly, the table gives us our adjusted NDL, no decompression limit. This is the maximum amount of time we can stay at a certain depth in a particular pressure group. So let's say we want to go to 13 meters on our second dive. Remember, our pressure group after our 1 hour surface interval is D. So we find column D and then the row with 14 meters, since that's the next greater depth past 13 meters. Follow the 14-meter row to where it intersects with column D. You find two numbers here, 22 in a white box and 76 in a blue box. 22 is RNT, or residual nitrogen time. You'll use this number later on when we return to Table 1. You can think of RNT in this way. In pressure group D, when diving to 13 meters, as soon as you jump in the water and descend, the amount of nitrogen still in your body is equivalent to diving at 13 meters for the previous 22 minutes. 76 is the adjusted no decompression limit for pressure group D at 13 meters. You can dive for no more than 76 minutes. It's adjusted for the remaining nitrogen in your body after your first dive and a 1 hour surface interval. Now we know our second dive to 13 meters can last no more than 76 minutes. Now if you add 22 and 76 together, you get 98, which, if you go back to Table 1 and follow 14 meters all the way to the NDL, the black box, you get 98 minutes. So now we know if you add the white and blue numbers for any depth and pressure group, you get the NDL for that depth back in Table 1. Make sense? You may have seen a dive profile in your logbook. We use dive profiles to keep track of our dives so we don't miss anything or leave anything out. Let's draw a profile based on our dives so far. Let's get started with our dive profile. First, we set up the profile structure. We start at the surface, descend, dive a while, ascend, and then have a surface interval. Then just repeat for how many dives you're planning. In this case, it's 3. So our first dive was to 15 meters. We dived for 40 minutes. As always, we made a safety stop. Remember what our pressure group was? N. Then we had a surface interval for 1 hour. After that, we were in pressure group D. Looking ahead, we want to make a second dive to 13 meters. Remember what our NDL for pressure group D was at 13 meters? 76 minutes, right? So we know that's our max time for dive 2. After we dive, we'll put our actual bottom time right here. We'll also need to know our RNT so we can find our pressure group at the end of the second dive. That was the number in the white box in table 3, 22 minutes. So we want to remember our RNT is 22 minutes. And hopefully we'll see a few blue spotted stingrays on dive 2. Ready? Let's go. Okay, now that we have a dive profile for our first dive, let's move on to the next dive. This is where RNT comes in. The first thing you need to do is to add your RNT to the actual bottom time of your dive, the time you spent diving. So let's say our second dive was 13 meters and it lasted for 50 minutes. Remember, our RNT for pressure group D at 13 meters, rounded up to 14 meters, was 22 minutes. Adding 22 and 50 gives us a total bottom time of 72 minutes. So we have a TBT of 72. We use the TBT to determine our ending pressure group. Back in table 1, we followed the depth row over to 14 meters because there's no 13 meter column, and then we scroll down until we find 72 or the next higher time. We stop at 73 and follow across until we come to letter T. That's our pressure group after surfacing from our second dive. Pressure group T. So now we can fill out our dive profile for the second dive. We can fill out our logbooks and have a nice lunch. If we want to go on a third dive, it's just a repeat of what we already did. We find our pressure group after the surface interval from table 2. Then we find our adjusted no decompression limit from table 3 along with our residual nitrogen time. After the dive is done, we can find our ending pressure group by adding RNT and ABT to get our TBT, which is total bottom time. It's that simple. Just remember, it's a common mistake not to add RNT and ABT on repetitive dives. A phrase that you might find helpful is, always find the RAT. RNT plus ABT equals TBT. Let's say you wanted to make 2 dives and needed to know what the minimum time you need to stay above water was. In other words, what's our minimum surface interval between 2 dives? If we just finished a dive to 18 meters for 45 minutes, and we want to head back into the water as soon as possible for a 14-meter dive at 1 hour, how would we find our minimum surface interval? First, we need to find our pressure group at the end of the first dive. So look at table 1 and find the 18-meter column. Our dive was 45 minutes, so find 45 or higher and scroll right to the pressure group letter. Did you get R? That's our pressure group at the end of our first dive, R. Now flip straight over to table 3 and locate the 14-meter row. Scroll across until we find the first blue box that has 1 hour or greater, because we want our second dive to be 14 meters for 1 hour. The first blue number that we find at 1 hour or greater is 61 minutes. If you follow that column up, you'll see pressure group J at the top. Remember, the blue box is the adjusted no decompression limit for 14 meters at pressure group J. So now we know we need to be in pressure group J to be able to make our second dive. The rest is a piece of cake. Flip over to table 2 and go back to row R. That's our pressure group from the first dive. And scroll right until you intersect with column J from the bottom. J is the pressure group we need to be in for dive 2. The point where R and J intersect, we have a box with 35 to 40 minutes. The lower number, 35, is our minimum surface interval. So now we know we need to wait at least 35 minutes before we can get in the water for our second dive. Alright, now we're going to take a look at the notes and rules, the fine print of the recreational dive planner. We've gone through some of these rules before, but we're going to go through each one individually right now. The recreational dive planner is designed specifically for planning recreational no decompression dives on air only. Do not attempt to use it for planning decompression dives. A safety stop for 3 minutes at 5 meters is required anytime the diver comes within 3 pressure groups of a no decompression limit and for any dive to a depth of 30 meters or greater. If a no decompression limit is exceeded by no more than 5 minutes, an 8-minute decompression stop at 5 meters is mandatory. Upon surfacing, the diver must remain out of the water for at least 6 hours prior to making another dive. If a no decompression limit is exceeded by more than 5 minutes, a 5-meter decompression stop of no less than 15 minutes is urged, air supply permitting. Upon surfacing, the diver must remain out of the water for at least 24 hours prior to making another dive. Flying after diving recommendations for dives within the no decompression limits. Single dives. A minimum pre-flight surface interval of 12 hours is suggested. Repetitive dives and/or multi-day dives. A minimum pre-flight surface interval of 18 hours is suggested. For dives requiring decompression stops, a minimum pre-flight surface interval greater than 18 hours is suggested. Diving at altitude 300 meters or higher requires the use of special procedures. If you are planning 3 or more dives in one day, beginning with the first dive, if your ending pressure group after any dive is W or X, the minimum surface interval between all subsequent dives is 1 hour. If your ending pressure group after any dive is Y or Z, the minimum surface interval between all subsequent dives is 3 hours. Note, since little is presently known about the physiological effects of multiple dives over multiple days, divers are wise to make fewer dives and limit their exposure towards the end of a multi-day dive series. General rules: ascend from all dives at a rate not to exceed 18 meters per minute. When planning a dive in cold water or under conditions that might be strenuous, plan the dive assuming the depth is 4 meters deeper than actual. Plan repetitive dives so each successive dive is to a shallower depth. Limit repetitive dives to 30 meters or shallower. Never exceed the limits of this planner and, whenever possible, avoid diving to the limits of the planner. 42 meters is for emergency purposes only. Do not dive to this depth. Now that you know how to use the RDP, let's try some sample problems. The first set is for Table 1. Read each question, pause the video, work the problem out, and then press play again to see what the answer is. Okay, here we go. Question 1. A dive to 13 meters for 1 hour yields what pressure group? The answer is B, pressure group Q. 13 meters doesn't appear on Table 1, so you use the 14-meter column. Follow the 14-meter column down until you find 60 minutes, 1 hour. You must use 61 minutes because 60 minutes does not appear. Next, you move horizontally along the row until you find pressure group Q. Question 2. A dive to 9 meters for 70 minutes yields what pressure group? The answer is A, pressure group M. 9 meters does not appear on the top of Table 1, and any dive shallower than 10 meters should be planned as a 10-meter dive. Find 10 meters at the top of Table 1, move down the column until you find 70 minutes. From there, move horizontally until you locate pressure group M. Question 3. A dive to 18 meters for 40 minutes yields what pressure group? The answer is D, pressure group P. Find 18 meters at the top of Table 1, and then follow the column down until you find 40 minutes. 40 does not appear, so you must use 41 minutes. Moving horizontally from 41 minutes, you find pressure group P. Alright, now let's take a look at Table 2. Question 1. After a dive, Table 1 shows you are in pressure group J. What will your new pressure group be after a 32-minute surface interval? The answer is A, pressure group E. Find pressure group J along the diagonal portion of Table 2. Moving inward horizontally, you will find the time interval of 32 to 40, 32 minutes through 40 minutes. 32 minutes falls within this interval. Next, move downward from this time interval box until finding your new pressure group E at the bottom of Table 2. Question 2. A diver in pressure group P will be in what new pressure group after a 55-minute surface interval? The answer is D, pressure group F. Find pressure group P along the diagonal portion of Table 2. Following the row horizontally inward from P, you will find the time interval of 52 to 59. 55 minutes falls within this interval. Now move downward vertically from this box until you find the new pressure group F at the bottom of Table 2. Question 3. A diver in pressure group I will be in what new pressure group after a surface interval of 4 hours? The answer is C, pressure group A. Find the pressure group I along the diagonal portion of Table 2 and follow the row in horizontally until you find the time interval 1:54 to 4:54. 4 hours falls between this time interval. Now move downward vertically until you find the new pressure group A at the bottom of Table 2. Right, let's look at some problems with Table 3. Question number 1. If you are in pressure group K after your surface interval and you are planning a dive to 18 meters, what is your adjusted no decompression limit? The answer is D, 26 minutes. On Table 3, find pressure group K along the top and the depth 18 meters along the left side. Follow the 18 meters row horizontally to the right until it intersects with the pressure group K column. There you'll find 30 in the top white portion of the box and 26 in the bottom blue portion. The adjusted no decompression limit is the number in the bottom blue portion, 26 minutes. Question 2. After a surface interval, you are in pressure group P and planning a dive to 16 meters. What is your adjusted no decompression limit for this dive? The answer is A, 24 minutes. Locate pressure group P along the top row of Table 3. Next, find the depth 16 meters along the left side of Table 3. Intersect the P column and the 16-meter row to find the box containing 48 in the top white portion and 24 in the bottom blue portion. The adjusted no decompression limit is the bottom number, 24 minutes. Question 3. If you're in pressure group M after a surface interval, what is the residual nitrogen time if you're planning a repetitive dive to 18 meters? The answer is C, 34 minutes. On the top of Table 3, find pressure group M. On the left-hand side of Table 3, locate 18 meters. Intersect the 18-meter row and the pressure group M column to find the box with numbers 34 in the top white portion and 22 in the bottom blue portion. The top number, 34 minutes, is the residual nitrogen time, or RNT. Question 4. Following a surface interval, you're in pressure group T. What would be your RNT for a repetitive dive planned to 16 meters? The answer is D, 60 minutes. On Table 3, find pressure group T at the top and the depth 16 meters on the left side. Intersect T and 16 to find the box containing 60 in the top white portion and 12 in the bottom blue portion. The R in T is the top number, 60 minutes. Now let's try some problems planning multiple repetitive dives. Indicate the final pressure group upon surfacing after the following series of dives. To avoid confusion, practice drawing the dive profile as you work the problems. Question 1. Your first dive is 15 meters for 40 minutes. Following a surface interval of 1 hour, you have a second dive to 12 meters for 60 minutes. The answer is C, pressure group S. After the first dive to 15 meters for 40 minutes, your pressure group from Table 1 would be N. Remember to use the 16-meter column since 15 meters does not exist, and use 42 since 42 minutes is not found on the table. On Table 2, begin at N and move horizontally to find the surface interval box that includes 60 minutes, 1 hour. That box is 1 hour to 1 hour and 8 minutes, making D your new pressure group. On Table 3, intersect D and 12 meters, the depth of the second dive, to 26 over 121. Add the top number, 26, of residual nitrogen time to your actual bottom time of 60 minutes for a total bottom time of 86 minutes. Return to Table 1 and locate the 12-meter column. Then follow it down until you find your total bottom time of 86 minutes. Round up to 88. From there, move horizontally to locate your new pressure group, S. Question 2. Your first dive is 18 meters for 30 minutes. Following a surface interval of 30 minutes, your second dive is 15 meters for 30 minutes. The answer is A, pressure group R. After the first dive to 18 meters for 30 minutes, your pressure group is K on Table 1. On Table 2, follow horizontally from K to the surface interval box that includes 30 minutes, the 30 through 37 minute box. Move down vertically from there to find your new pressure group, F. On Table 3, intersect F and 15 meters. Round up to 16 meters, the depth of your second dive, to find the box containing 23 over 49. Add the 23 minutes of R and T to your 30-minute ABT, the time of your second dive, to get a TBT of 53 minutes. Return to Table 1 and locate the 16-meter column. Follow it down until you find 53 minutes. Then proceed horizontally to locate your new pressure group, R. Question 3. Your first dive is 17 meters for 50 minutes. After a surface interval of 24 minutes, your second dive is 16 meters for 30 minutes. The answer is C, pressure group X. After the first dive to 17 meters, you must use 18. For 50 minutes, you must use 51. Your pressure group from Table 1 is T. On Table 2, begin at T and move in horizontally until you locate the box 24 minutes falls within, the 23 through 26 minute box. Move down vertically to find a new pressure group of N. On Table 3, intersect N and 16 meters to find an R and T of 42, that's the top number, and adjusted no decompression limit of 30, the bottom number. Add the 42-minute R and T to your 30-minute ABT for a TBT of 72 minutes. Return to Table 1 and locate 16 meters at the top. Proceed down the column until you find 72 minutes. Then proceed horizontally to find your new pressure group, X. Because you're in group X, you must wait at least an hour between all subsequent repetitive dives. Alright, we're almost done. The last group of problem is find your minimum surface interval. Remember, drawing the dive profiles helps you avoid confusion. Our first dive is 18 meters for 40 minutes. Our second dive is 18 meters for 40 minutes as well. The minimum surface interval is our answer is B, 1 hour and 8 minutes. Start with Table 1. After a dive to 18 meters for 40 minutes is not listed, so you must use 41. Your pressure group is P. Next, go to Table 3. Find 18 meters on the left side and follow the row horizontally to the right until you find the first adjusted no decompression limit, number in the bottom blue portion of the box. The number you find is 40. Follow the column up to find pressure group D. Turn to Table 2 and find where pressure group P on the diagonal intersects with pressure group D on the bottom. In that box, 1 hour and 8 minutes to 1 hour and 16 minutes. 1 hour and 8 minutes is the minimum surface interval needed to make the two dives safely. Question 2. Our first dive is 16 meters for 60 minutes, and our second dive is 14 meters for 70 minutes. The minimum surface interval is? The answer is C, 1 hour and 7 minutes. Start on Table 1. Under 16 meters, find 60 minutes, which puts you in pressure group T. Now turn to Table 3. Find the 14-meter row starting on the left side and follow it to the right until you find the first adjusted no decompression limit on the bottom blue portion of the box that is 70 minutes or greater. The number you find is 71. Come up the column vertically until you find the pressure group F. Turn to Table 2 and find where pressure groups T and F intersect by following T from the diagonal slope horizontally and F from the bottom vertically. The interval you find is 1 hour and 7 minutes to 1 hour and 13 minutes. 1 hour and 7 minutes is the minimum surface interval required to make these two dives safely. Question 3. Our first dive is 18 meters for 50 minutes. Our second dive is 14 meters for 60 minutes. The minimum surface interval is? The answer is A, 42 minutes. Start on Table 1 and find 50 minutes in the 18-meter column. 50 is not there, so you must use 51 minutes. This puts you in pressure group T. Go to Table 3 and find 14 meters on the left side. Follow the 14-meter row horizontally from left to right until you find the first adjusted no decompression limit, the number in the bottom blue portion of the box, that is 60 minutes or greater. You find 61 minutes and follow the column up vertically to find pressure group J. On Table 2, find pressure group T on the diagonal and pressure group J at the bottom and find the surface interval where they intersect. At the intersection, you find 42 to 47. So 42 minutes is the minimum surface interval needed to make the two dives safely.